Hare Krishna. So once again, we welcome each and every one of you for joining for today evening discussion on the another chapter of Bhagavad Gita. Today we're going to start with the 9th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, titled as the most confidential knowledge. Before we begin with that, let us offer prayers together. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Preshthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pashatadi Shatarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaur Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare Hare. So welcome once again. Let's start our discussion with the chapter 9. Before that, we'll do a quick recap of what we have discussed yesterday. Yesterday, our discussion was on the topic called as death, the final call, which was based on the chapter 8 of Bhagavad Gita. In this chapter began with Arjuna asking around approximately 8 questions to Lord Shri Krishna. What is Adhyatma, Adhyagya, Adhibhuta, Yagya, etc., etc. Brahman, like that, he had asked a question. Where does the Ishvara resides, and how can a devotee remember the Lord? Or in other words, how can a devotee attain to Krishna or the Krishna's abode when they are facing death? How to prepare for that? So at largely, we had discussed 2 main themes through this discussion, through the discussion of chapter 8. First, the law of transmigration, how a living entity acquires a new set of body. In other words, how did we got the set of body? It depends a lot on our karmic activities, and based on what activities we perform, that creates our absorption. And according to that absorption is something that what we remember at the end of life. Yam yamapi smaran bhava tayate ante kalevaram. Krishna says accordingly you get a next life. So how can a devotee remember Krishna at the end of life? So Lord Shri Krishna said, if you want to pass the final exam, you need to do 2 things. So why don't I ask all of you, those of you who present yesterday, anyone would like to give an answer if they know what is the answer for it? Where is my Zoom? Oh, here it is, yes. So anyone amongst the audience, in case I believe you might be present yesterday, would you like to give an answer? What did Krishna say? What can we do? Oh, okay. There is a restriction on switching on cameras. Okay, the settings had been made. Now you can unmute also yourself if you want to speak, and you can switch on your camera also. There were some settings changed. So once again, my question here, anyone knows the answer? What does Krishna said? What are we supposed to do to pass the final exam? That is death. Should I count up to 10? And then I say, okay, all right, you guys don't know the answer, then I should give the answer. Therefore, it's very important, if you're studying a subject matter like Bhagavad Gita, we should sit with a pen and paper. We make a note of it. Because otherwise, we'll miss out on the very, very important concepts. And first of all, we are attending an online session. It's not a direct face-to-face interaction. On top of it, most of the time, the speaker cannot see the student. And God knows what the student is thinking about. So, your attention span is going to be very less. So when you're taking out your 1.5 hour or 1 hour every day, then we should really, really make sure that it's worth it. So I saw some messages coming up on the chat. Madhu, she writes, to remember Krishna. Yes, that's the whole question. How do you remember Krishna? Krishna Chandraji, you want to say something?
I thought in chapter 8, text 5, how to attain Krishna and remember Krishna. Krishna says at whoever at the end of his life quits his body, remembering me alone at once attain my nature.
Agreed. My question is, how do you remember Krishna?
How do you remember Krishna?
Krishna spoke about that also.
Yeah. Then if you look at chapter 4 itself, Krishna says, if you want to know the truth about me, go and, you have to go and get it from the parampara, from the...
Correct. The point is, you're correct, Krishna Chandraji, you're correct. Point is, how do you remember Krishna at the end of life? To the very specific. And that's the point here. In other words, what practice we must have cultivated all through our life because of which we are able to remember Krishna. For example,
chanting his name.
Yes, chanting, okay. What else? Krishna's... Yes, the correct answer is Anusmarana. So, like Krishna Chandraji was saying, was correct, Smarana. And Madhu, I believe, was saying Smarana. Correct. But Krishna says Anusmarana. And I had discussed this, why Krishna didn't say Smarana. The Smarana means remember. Then all of us here can devise our own way of remembering Krishna. But Krishna said Anusmarana. The way the acharyas and the scriptures have told you to remember Smarana or to remember Krishna, that's what we have to follow. So therefore I was establishing the fact why we should be chanting 16 hours, because that is what has been prescribed. We should be doing, and it's not that Srila Prabhupada only told us to chant 16 hours, that he wasn't chanting, he himself was chanting. So that's the first point. And as Ashish Prabhu and Mother Gunja said, Anusmara, and the second part is Abhyas. Abhyas means the practice of what we have, the spiritual culture which has been taught to us. If we do this, and the foremost of it is chanting, then this becomes an ongoing process of cultivating remembrance of Krishna. And when we cultivate remembrance of Krishna like this, then at the end of life, there is a potential for us to remember Krishna. This was our first major subject. We had spent a good amount of time. And the second major subject of yesterday's discussion, which I feel was very, very important, was about comparing material with the spiritual world. That's what we had discussed about. Comparing material world with the spiritual world. So, material world Krishna describes as Dukhalayam Ashashvatam, is a place of misery and is temporary. And we had discussed, we had kind of drawn an analogy about the nature of this material world. Anyone remembers what we had compared material world with? What is material world compared with? Material world is a place of misery. It's a place of punishment and purification. So what is material world is compared with?
Prison.
Yes, prison house. And we said prison house provides you a very basic facilities of living. It's not like a 5-star hotel. So if it becomes a 5-star hotel, then nobody would like to leave it. So that's what we had discussed yesterday. Yes, comparing material and spiritual world. Whereas spiritual world is a place which is eternal, is infallible, never gets destroyed. Whereas material world is again and again created, again and again destroyed. Spiritual world is ever blissful, and it's a fulfiller of all one's desire. Like that we had discussed. And finally, the point of discussion in chapter 8 was how to attain to this spiritual destination, how to go back to Godhead. Lord Shri Krishna said, for Karma Yogi, Jnana Yogi, and Ashtanga Yogi, they have to do endeavor on their own. Whereas for Bhakti Yogi, he depends on the Lord. And because he is dependent on the Lord takes care of him, and Lord's taking back to Godhead like that. So that was a discussion in chapter 8. Moving forward now, in chapter 8, we saw that after answering Arjuna's 8 questions, Krishna now wants to return back to the theme that he was discussing in chapter 7. Actually, Krishna said, Tat Shru, hear from me. And Krishna wanted to speak, and Krishna was speaking. But because Krishna used some technical terms which Arjuna didn't understand, so Arjuna asked a question. At the beginning of the 8th chapter, verse number 1 and 2, he asked 2 questions which led for Krishna to speak the rest of the chapter. Once Krishna have answered Arjuna's question, now again Krishna goes back to the theme which he had started in the 7th chapter, and that was about the glories of Bhakti Yoga, and how do we practice this Bhakti Yoga? Through hearing. In other words, to develop that faith, we require knowledge, and that comes from hearing. So with that, we come to this 9th chapter. 9th chapter, if I have to give you a very brief overview of this 9th chapter, 9th chapter will establish once again Bhakti Yoga to be the highest. 9th chapter would also talk about some improper practices or improper worship practices, which Krishna would highlight the 3 types of those improper worship that a human being does. And then this chapter, which is titled as the most confidential knowledge, then in the verse number 26 to verse number 34, the last 8 to 9 verses, Lord Shri Krishna will reveal the most confidential knowledge. And what is that? We'll see that in a short while. However, before we begin our discussion, I would like to introduce or re-establish 4 categories of people which we have already discussed until now. So I thought it would be important for us to at least know how there are 4 varieties of people existing in the society. The 2 varieties of people that you see on the screen right now is, one is impious materialist, and second is pious materialist. Impious materialist means one who works for his desires. Impious means one fulfills his material desires even at the cost of performing sinful actions. Whereas pious materialist refers to somebody who follows scriptures like Karma Kandi, which we had discussed in the 3rd chapter, follows the scriptures injunctions, and through the principles of religion, he tries to fulfill his material desires but do not violate any laws of dharma like that. So we're going to see 4 categories of people. We have just introduced 2 categories and into 3 categories or 3 varieties. First, we're going to look at what inspires them to take to religious life. When we're talking about impious materialists, because they are impious, which means they do not have any faith, they do not believe in dharma. So they are the one, for them dharma does not exist. For them, eating, mating, defending, and sleeping is the only goal and purpose of life. Pious materialists, the motivation for them to practice dharma is artha and kama, so that they will get profit, money or wealth, artha, by adhering to the religious codes, and through that artha, material benefit, they'll be able to fulfill their desires. What kind of religious practice these categories of people take? For impious materialists, their goal of life, or how they look at their life is eat, drink, and be merry. And finally, such people die one day like cats and dogs. In other words, their life is like of an animal, where they don't see anything or don't know anything beyond fulfilling the basic needs of the body. Ahar, nidra, bhaya, maitunam. Very much addicted to sex life. Pious materialists, they adapt to any type of religious practice, to any devata for that reason, but without much knowledge. In other words, these are the people, on Monday, they will go to Lord Shiva's temple, on Tuesday, Hanumanji's temple, Friday, Durga's temple, or, I believe Monday or Saturday, whenever you go. I guess Saturday is Ganeshi day. And, different days, they'll go to different temples. They'll go to different babas and ammas who proclaim themselves to be God, and they will offer worship to them. And they'll, with a desire, they'll make a prayer with an intention to get their desire fulfilled. So like this, they perform their religious activities. Then what is the result of their practice? For an impious materialist, result is very clear for them. Krishna has created 28 special accommodation, which are 28 special types of hellish planets, where they are thrown out of this life and they have to suffer for their sinful reactions. And after that, they're put into the lower species of life, like cats, dogs, cockroaches, spiders, and whatnot. And through the natural process of evolution, then they go through the lower species, and after millions of lifetimes, they get a very rare human form of life. That's the situation of an impious materialist, which means a sinful person. For a pious materialist, because they have lived by the principles dharma, they would certainly get at least a human form of life on the earthly planetary system, or else they may get to Swargaloka. This is about impious and pious materialists. Now, the third and the fourth category of people are the Gyanis or the Yogis, third variety, and the fourth is Bhakti Yogi. Now, what is the motivation for this Jnani or Yogi to take to religious practices? The motivation is the Jnani is looking for liberation or moksha, whereas Yogi wants to acquire siddhi or mystic siddhis or perfections. That's their motivation. Let me ask this question to all of you now. What is the motivation of a Bhakta Yogi or Bhakti Yogi to take to religious life? What would you say is their motivation? I've given you enough clues. I'm kind of doing a trivia with all of you to see how much you have learned so far. What is the motivation for a devotee to practice spiritual life or to be a religious man or woman? So Smita says sadhu sangha. Okay. Who is speaking?
Service of God.
Yes, thank you. Who is that person who just spoke now?
Lina.
Okay, thank you, Madalina. That's the correct answer. Yes, service to God is actually their prime motivation. Service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Okay, so hopefully screen is visible now again. Yes, so Bhakti Yogi, service to Supreme Lord is their prime motivation. Now, what kind of religious practice they take to? For a Jnani or Yogi, their religious practice involves severe austerity, penances, worshipping of the impersonal form of the Lord, and also a speculation where they interpret on their own or they interpolate the Vedic injunctions and come to various degrees of conclusions. Whereas for Bhakti Yogi, how does he take to religious practice? The very first thing that he does he takes or finds a shelter of a Vaishnava Guru or bona fide Guru. And under his guidance, he takes to the religious practices like chanting of the holy names, reading and hearing about Krishna. What is the destination? For a Jnani or Yogi, they may attain siddhi, mystic perfections. They may attain moksha, and they may up to go to the 5 different liberations which are described, out of which the 4 liberations are Vaikuntha liberations. For Bhakti Yogi, the Lord personally arranges to take them home back to Godhead. And a very simple example is of Shabri. Now, Shabri, if you think for a second, I'm quoting Ramayana here. When her spiritual master was passing away from this world, departing from this world, Shabri pleaded to her spiritual master, my real spiritual master Gurudev, please allow me to come along with you. Let me self-immolate after your disappearance. And the spiritual master did not agree to that. He was so pleased by her devotional service and devotional attitude, he blessed her instead. He said, I bless you that your object of worship and meditation, that is Lord Ram, I bless you that Lord Ram would appear to you, would come and personally meet you in this ashram. Wait for him to come, and therefore you should live. So Shabri continued to live, and after almost 5 to 6 decades, Lord Ram along with Lakshman finally came to that place, and we know the whole story that happened, Pastor, hopefully. And the very next day, Lord Ram sent off Shabri back to the spiritual world. So that's how on the path of devotion, the process is simple, and facing the final exam is simple, because Krishna is always standing by the side of the devotees. So this 9th chapter is nothing but focuses a lot on describing this Bhakti Yogi or a devotee, let's call it devotee, and the relationship between the devotee and the Lord Shri Krishna. So let's begin our discussion on the 9th chapter, where we see the acronym for this 9th chapter is King, where K refers to the knowledge. Let's begin with knowledge. What knowledge is described here? Lord Shri Krishna begins speaking the 9th chapter. And he says, I don't have the verses today on the slide deck, so in case if you have your Bhagavad Gita, if not, pull it out and let's recite together. 9th chapter, verse number 1. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha Imam tu te guhyatamam pravakshyami anasuyave jnanam vijnana sahitam yajnanatva mokshase shubhat. And Krishna said, my dear Arjuna, because pravakshyami anasuyave, because you're not ever envious of me, I shall impart to you this most confidential knowledge and realization, knowing which you shall be relieved of the miseries of material existence. So Lord Shri Krishna says, Idam tute guhyatamam. I'm going to give you the most confidential knowledge. So is there any prerequisite for confidential knowledge? Yes. Let's take a look at it. Rajavidya. Krishna says, I'm going to give you the king of knowledge. So what is the qualification to receive this knowledge which Krishna is about to give? Anasuyave. Arjuna, you are non-envious of me. Think about it for a second. Lord Shri Krishna had to speak about his opulences to Duryodhana. How would Duryodhana would have reacted? Now, if in case you know a little bit about Mahabharata, we know that when Lord Shri Krishna came as a Shantidut messengers on behalf of Pandavas, so Duryodhana, when he heard that Krishna is coming, he wanted to give a very grand reception to Lord Shri Krishna. And this incident is happening post Duryodhana Arjun approaching Krishna and begging Krishna for the help. So Duryodhana have already got the Narayani Sena of Lord Shri Krishna. So now Krishna comes, he wants to give a grand reception and wants to keep Krishna in one of the best of the palaces, which was of Dushasan. Dushasan is asked to leave the palace. Now this palace will be used for Krishna's hospitality or Krishna's service. So Lord Shri Krishna comes, Duryodhana. Looks like a great service attitude, isn't it? Duryodhana makes such an elaborate arrangement for Krishna's prasadam and then Krishna's accommodation and everything. And the next day, when Lord Shri Krishna enters the assembly hall and then he presents the side of the Pandavas and he tells that why Dhritarashtra should give back the kingdom or else at least give the 5 villages, Duryodhana became so angry, so upset, that he wanted to arrest Lord Shri Krishna and he actually told his soldiers to arrest Krishna. So here's my question to all of you. Here we have a person just 24 hours before was showing so much love and affection to Krishna, and 24 hours later he's so much angry with Krishna. And on top of it, the mistake is not awesome. There's something wrong Krishna has said. Let me give you 1 or 2 more examples. How many of you have heard of Kamsa? The Mamaji of Krishna, if you know of. Now, Kamsa loved Devaki, so much so in the history of the mankind, there is no other example where the prince would have driven the chariot of his sister to her in-laws' house. So here, Kamsa sits down on the chariot of Vasudeva, and he drives the chariot of Vasudeva and Devaki to drop them to Devaki's new house. So if you read Srimad Bhagavatam, it is described in the 10th canto. Kamsa had tears in his eyes when he was bidding farewell to Devaki. So now if I just tell you this much story, that Krishna was having tears in his, Kamsa was having tears in his eyes, and he was so emotionally affected that he thought, no, why should we send somebody else to drop my sister to in-law's house? I would personally go. So what would you say? Kamsa loved his sister a lot. Now look at the rest of the story. Down the line, when he's traveling, there is one Akashvani which says Devki's 8th son would kill Kamsa, would kill you. You are a foolish person. You are driving the chariot of your killer. Kamsa becomes so angry that he takes out a sword and he wants to chop off the head of Devki. Was there a love or was that a facade? Just a show of love. So would you agree Kamsa was envious? Would you agree Duryodhana was envious of Krishna, but they were hiding their enviousness by making a show of some hospitality or making a show of love? Actually envious. So if Duryodhana, Krishna would have chosen Duryodhana for the subject matter of Bhagavad Gita, God only knows what kind of questions he would have asked. Or even he would have asked questions or not. Bhagavad Gita would not have occurred the way it has occurred. So the very first quality Krishna says required is non-enviousness. Only then. So the subject matter, once again, is the most important subject matter, most confidential knowledge. And what is that most confidential knowledge? The relationship between the Lord and his devotee is so secretive that it's very difficult for a layman to understand what's going on here. Example, Ras Leela. People have such strange ideas about the subject matter of Ras Leela. Long ago, almost 20 years or maybe before, I was watching a TV, Sanskar TV, and there was this program was coming by a Brahma Kumari, one of the representative Brahma Kumari. She was speaking on a podium on a stage, and she was saying Krishna was a womanizer, woman hunter. He was a man of poor, low character. Krishna was no god. He was a simple cowherd man. But now, because everyone knows Krishna spoke Bhagavad Gita, so Krishna did spoke Bhagavad Gita, and in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna did show his universal form. So she had to justify her reasoning why Krishna is a low character man. So she said, yes, correct, Krishna spoke Bhagavad Gita. Yes, Krishna showed his Virat Roop, but that was only his magic show. That was not his actual strength. He was a very low class man. He could only show that little strength. Why? From where did he got his strength? From his childhood. He used to get up and perform Ashtanga Yoga and meditate on Param Ishwar Shiv. So like that, this particular lady was speaking about it. So I don't know which Shastra she read, which version of Bhagavad Gita, which version of Srimad Bhagavatam she read, where she had such a concocted idea about Lord Shri Krishna. And her problem, major problem was Lord Shri Krishna performing Ras Leela dance, etc., etc. So relationship between devotees and Lord is very, very confidential. Let me give another example. How many of you have heard the place Rameshwaram? Right? There's a place down south in India, correct? Would anyone like to give me the answer? What does Rameshwaram means? Rameshwaram. Who knows the meaning of Rameshwaram? Anyone? What does Rameshwaram means? The Lord of Ram. Okay, good. So is another. Okay, who is speaking?
I'm Subhashri.
Yes, mother.
Is it Ram and Ishwar together?
Okay. So the very first meaning which is drawn out of this Rameshwaram is the Ishwar of Lord Ram. So what had happened at Rameshwaram, why this place is called as Rameshwaram? It was never called as Rameshwaram. It got the name of Rameshwaram because Lord Ram performed a particular act there. Before starting his journey to Lanka via the ocean, Lord Ram had built a Shivlingam and he had worshipped Lord Shiva there. Because he worshipped Lord Shiva there, therefore that place became Rameshwar, the Ishwar of Lord Ram. So now there are people say that how Lord Ram can be the Supreme Personality Godhead because Lord Ram worshipped Lord Shiva, correct? Then Lord Shiva should be the Supreme Personality Godhead because he got worshipped by Lord Ram. Well, if that is the case, then Arjun should be the Supreme Personality Godhead. Why? Because Arjun is a master sitting on the chariot, and who is driving the chariot of Arjuna? Krishna. If Krishna is a driver and Arjun is the master, then Arjun should be the Supreme Personality Godhead. Then the Bhagavad Gita, the question must have been asked by Krishna, and Arjuna must have become the spiritual master of Krishna. But it is not the fact. We are studying from Bhagavad Gita where the servant-master relationship is only different. Where actually the so-called servant is instructing the master on the philosophy of life, isn't it? So it's a very, very tricky subject which requires non-envious heart to be able to understand this intimate past tense of the Lord. So Ramayana mentions when Lord Ram had established Shivlinga, then all the sages, all the devatas appeared and they began to glorify Mahadev. Har Har Mahadev, Mahadev ki jai, like that they were glorifying. Mahadev is the greatest of all, being worshipped by Lord Ram like that. And then it is mentioned that the Shivlingam cracked open and Lord Shiva came out and he said, "You fools, what are you saying? I am not to be worshipped. I am receiving worship from my worshipful Lord because this is what will please him. He wants to do this, it pleases him, that's the reason I'm accepting him. Then the Rameshwaram got the another name, which means Ram Ishwara. Lord Ram is the Ishwar of all, which was established by Lord Shiva. So this would be the most confidential subject matter which would be discussed at length, which we will not be taking today. I will be doing this 9th chapter in 2 parts. We'll take some part of discussion today, but this most confidential aspect will be discussed tomorrow. So let's go back to our presentation again. So qualification to receive this knowledge means non-envious. What is the means to receive this knowledge? Through proper hearing. And what are the benefits? As Krishna says, relief from all kind of miseries of material existence. So what are the gradations of confidential knowledge? Srila Prabhupada writes in the purport to first verse of 9th chapter. There is confidential, more confidential, and there is most confidential. Confidential knowledge is, I am not the body but soul. More confidential knowledge is knowledge which has been revealed in the 7th and the 8th chapter about the Bhakti Yoga and about the opulences of the Lord. And the most confidential knowledge is about the Shuddha Bhakti, the pure devotional service, and the relationship between the Lord and his pure devotees. That is the most confidential knowledge. So to hear this confidential knowledge, what prerequisites or what qualification is required? First qualification is anasuyava, non-enviousness. And the second qualification, which is mentioned in the 3rd verse, is faith. Faith is a prerequisite for anything and everything in life. If you don't have faith, then actually nothing can exist in our life. We cannot do anything. Similarly, to make progress, to be able to understand spiritual life, we need to put some faith and begin our journey. And I'll give you one very short and simple example of this faith, the power of faith. Srila Prabhupada, his spiritual master, Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he had a disciple by the name of Sajjan Brahmachari, who joined Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur when he was 8-year-old. At the age of 8, he joined Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur. Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur arranged for his formal education and he graduated from the 12th standard. In those days, the result would come by post mail. So he got his result by post mail, and Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur happened to be there in the ashram. He got the result, he opened it, and he called for Sajjan Brahmachari. The result has been announced. And Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur looked at Sajjan Brahmachari and said, "My dear disciple, I'm sorry to say, you have failed. You have failed in your 12th exams." And Sajjan Brahmachari was such a young man, in fact a boy, said to a great personality like Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, "You are wrong." And Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur was surprised. He said, "My dear spiritual master, you're wrong. It is not possible I can fail." So Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur in a surprise asked, "How do you say so? What makes you say that you cannot fail?" And then Sajjan Brahmachari, with all his humility, said, "My dear Gurudev, I have heard from so many times from you that one who has undisputed, undeviated faith, unflinching faith on Guru's instructions, on the instructions of the scriptures, can never fail in any exam of life. What to speak about the 12th exam?" And when Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur heard this, he had a big smile on his face and he said, "Yes, you are right. Sajjan Brahmachari, you have got the highest mark in the whole of Nadia district." And that Sajjan Brahmachari went on to become Srila Vamana Das Babaji Maharaj in the same Gaudiya Math like that. So that's the power of faith. We have to begin with faith and begin to apply the teachings. Then only we'll know if it's really working or not. Let's go back to the presentation again. Then Lord Shri Krishna gives the characteristics of this knowledge. Text number 2 of 9th chapter. I'll be reciting the shloka. Rajavidya Rajaguhyam Pavitram Idamuttamam Pratyakshvagamam Dharmyam Susukham Kartamapyayam. What does it mean? Let's take a look what it means. The most confidential knowledge, Rajvidya. Rajvidya means is the king of all knowledge. If you know this, you don't have to study the rest of the scriptures to understand what scripture teaches you. Rajguhyam is the most confidential knowledge because here the confidential aspect of the relationship between the Lord and devotees are being described. This is Pavitram, Idam, Uttamam. Pavitra means whoever we are, whatever sinful background we may have, if we come and accept this knowledge and take to the practice of this knowledge, we'll get freed from all of our sinful reactions. Not only from sinful reactions, we'll get freed from the desires to commit those sinful activities. That's what Pavitram Uttamam. Then Pratyaksha Swagamam, direct perception of self by realization. This Rajavidya that Krishna is about to reveal in this chapter, Krishna says, will give you a self-realization where you can see your true nature. And not only that, you can even have darshan of the knowledge through the means of this knowledge. And then Dharmayam Susukham Avyam. Dharma means it is a perfection of religion. What is perfection of religion? Savaipam sam paro dharmo yato bhakte radoksaya hitokya pratihata yayatma suprasidati. Savaipam sam paro dharmo, the highest dharma, the highest occupational duties by which one can engage into the devotional service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So dharmayam, this knowledge which I am about to give you, the transcendent knowledge, would invoke a pure devotional service in your heart towards the Supreme Lord. Susukham is all blissful because the spiritual culture, the practice, the lifestyle is so simple and so wonderful. We sing, we dance, we eat best of the food, we have best of the darshan in the form of the darshan of the Lord, we have the best of the association in terms of the saintly association of devotees. Everything, all our senses get totally gratified. Therefore, Susukham Avyam, eternally everlasting, which means it does not end. Our surface propensity and disposition towards the Lord, it continues to grow and exist even after liberation. So there is a class of, or the categories of spiritualists known as Mayavadis. They say you should serve until you realize you are God. Once you have realized you are God, you don't have to serve anyone. Which means once you emerge into Brahman, then your spiritual practices stop. You don't have to do it. Whereas it is mentioned, Abhyam, eternally everlasting, our devotional service to the Lord continues. So when Arjun heard like this, he had a question in his mind. My dear Lord, why aren't people then accepting this joyful process? It's such a, you just glorified this process. So why people are not doing it? And Krishna gives the answer in the 3rd verse of 9th chapter. Krishna says, Arjuna, it's just because of lack of faith. Such people think that the knowledge of my Aishwarya Gyan, which Krishna gives, we're going to give in the 9th chapter and then elaborate in the 10th chapter, they consider it to be poetic, or they consider it to be a fictional writing. Because of not having faith in me, they do not get the benefit, or they're unable to take to this joyful process like this. And with that, we come to the next section where now Lord Shri Krishna begins to speak about his Aishwarya Gyan. I refers to inconceivable relationship. Krishna said, Arjuna, to be able to take to bhakti, you require faith. Faith comes from knowledge. And if I give you the knowledge of my Aishwarya, my supreme nature, but naturally it will inspire bhakti in your heart. To inspire bhakti in the heart of all of us, the spirit of surrender, awe and reverence for the Supreme Personality Godhead. Now Krishna briefly speaks about his openness. In this particular section, inconceivable relationship, Lord Shri Krishna establishes how he is all-pervasive, entire, all over the universe. He is the cause of the creation, he is the cause of the maintenance, and he is the cause of the destruction. He is all-pervasive, yet he cannot be seen. Every living entity is within him, yet he is not within any and every living entity. The Prakriti functions under his jurisdiction, but he is not controlled by Prakriti. Like that, Lord Shri Krishna establishes his Achintya Bhed Abhed Tattva here. And then he concludes this section by saying this very important shloka. Mayadhyakshena prakriti suyate sa characharam hetunanena kanteya jagat viprarivartate. So we'll do one thing. When we have verses, I will read out the translation, and any of you who would like to read the translation, you can read out the translation. So please go ahead. Any one of you can unmute yourself and read out the translation as you see on the slide deck.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji.
Yes,
Shall I read?
please. Yeah, please read it.
Yeah. Maya dhakkisena prakriti suyate sa chara charam hetu na ne konteya jagat vipari paratate.
The translation, Prasad Prabhu. You're supposed to read translation.
Sorry. This material nature, which is one of my energies, is working under my direction. O son of Kunti, producing all moving and non-moving beings under its rule, this manifestation is created and annihilated again and again.
So Lord Shri Krishna says this Prakriti, who is the cause of the creation of all kinds of living entities, functions under my jurisdiction. I am the supreme director of this whole material nature. Hetunanena kanteya jagat viprarivartate, and this material nature is created and destroyed again and again. Yesterday in our 8th chapter, when we were talking about the material world, we spoke about this destruction of the material world, which happens at 3 different levels, 4 different levels, but the destruction of this material nature happens at 3 different levels like that. So the only purpose why Lord Shri Krishna spoke about all this is to just simulate our awe and reverence for the Lord. Then Arjuna pondered, why some people despise you? They do not want to respect you as a Supreme Personality Godhead. You pervade everything. You're the cause of everything. You're cause of sustenance and maintenance. So why people would not accept you? Krishna now begins to speak. This brings us to the 3rd section of this 9th chapter, where N stands for non-worship, from verse number 11 to 25. Where in this section, Lord Shri Krishna would explain that there are different categories of people who approach him in different ways according to their level of devotional consciousness. Let's do a quick exercise. Where is our audience? So all of you, please follow my, whatever I just say. So let's begin with, please raise your hand like this. Okay? All your hand up like this. Now, please touch your nose with your hand. Correct? Straightforward? So Krishna says this is a direct way of approaching me. Now in this section that we're going to read, Krishna talks about avidhi purvakam. Krishna says, ultimately, I am the source, I am the cause of everything. Even if somebody is worshipping Devata, he is indirectly worshipping me. So there are 3 categories of worship that happen. One is a worship according to which people claim, you are God, I am God. So that is called as Mayavad philosophy. So they say, you are God, I am God. So we are worshipping the Devata, or we are worshipping the Lord, just to get this realization that I am God. Second category of worship is where they worship Devatas, where they worship, the mountains, the planets, the animals like that, different living entities, and also the Devatas. That is another category of worship. And third worship is the worship of the Virat Rupa Lord, Virat Purush, the universal form of the Lord, which Krishna will show to Arjuna in 11th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. So Krishna says this worship is like touching the nose in this way, indirect. So you can approach me directly, but they are foolish. They don't understand that. So they want to take this long winding route to come to me finally. And that is why Krishna says they are misguided. So this is what would be the discussion. However, this discussion begins with, first of all, Krishna speaking about the people who do not accept him at all, and the people who accept him directly as a Supreme Personality Godhead. And these 3 categories will be discussed later on. So let's first talk about the people who accept him to be the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And Krishna says, this is 11th verse, Avajananti Mamudha Manusham Tanamashita Param Bhavam Ajananto Mama Bhut Maheshwaram. Please read out translation, any one of you?
May I, Prabhuji?
Yes, please. Please go ahead.
Fools deride me when I descend in the human form. They do not know my transcendental nature or as the Supreme Lord of all that be.
So Krishna is saying, fools deride me. Just like I was giving an example in the beginning that I heard one lecture from one of the speaker from Brahma Kumaris. She said the Krishna got all his power because he used to perform Ashtanga Yoga early in the morning for several hours, where he would sit in meditation on Lord Shiva, and that's why God his power. So people say that Krishna was just a mere human being, just like Duryodhan. Duryodhan considered Krishna to be some magician. He thought, what's the big deal with Krishna? He has got some training on magic shows. He shows his magic shows and bewilders others. I am a far greater magician than Krishna. Similarly, Shishupal thought of Krishna to be a simple cowherd boy, and he thought he has no value in front of a great Kshatriya like Shishupal. So like this, Krishna explains that people consider or try to blaspheme the Supreme Personality Godhead by comparing him to a mortal human being, because Krishna looks like, to say we look like, we are of the same image of the Supreme Lord. So that's how people are misdirected or fooled about Lord's position. So Arjun pondered on this, and Arjun thought, my dear Lord, what is their position who are rejecting Krishna's form and divinity? And Krishna said, Mogha sha mogha karmano mogha jnana vichetsaha rakshashim asurim chaiva prakritam mohinam shritaha. Please read out the translation. What happens to those who reject the Supreme Personality of Godhead?
Those
May I, Guruji?
Yes, we can have one by one. So those who have not read, they can read now.
Those who are thus bewildered are attracted by demonic and atheistic views. In that deluded condition, their hopes for liberation, their fruitive activities, and their culture of knowledge are all defeated.
So what it means? That their culture of knowledge are all defeated. They are bewildered by the demonic and atheistic views. How many of you have heard of Hiranyakashipu? Yes? Hopefully? Okay. Hiranyakashipu was a son of a Brahmana. He had a younger brother by the name of Hiranyaksha, who was killed by one of the incarnation of the Lord as Varahadev. When Hiranyaksha was killed by Varahadev, Hiranyakashipu, being a son of a great Brahmana, very well learned with the scriptures, was instructing his bhabi and his mother and other relatives why they should not cry or they should be morose, why they should not be morose on the departure of Hiranyaksha. So he spoke to them. First thing he said, we are not the body but spirit soul. Whoever is born is sure to die. Then he spoke about the law of karma. The law of karma is such, we all get reactions, good reaction, bad reactions. And third thing, he spoke about how everyone is under the control of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Yes? This is Hiranyakashipu speaking. Those of you know Hiranyakashipu. And that same Hiranyakashipu was totally envious of the Supreme Lord. His 5-year-old son, when he came back from the Gurukul, Hiranyakashipu asked him to sit on his lap, and he asked, so Prahlad, what did you learn in the school? And Prahlad said, my dear best of the kings, my dear best of the asuras, the strength, all your strength, the source of all your strength is Lord Vishnu. Kindly surrender to him. And when Hiranyakashipu heard like this, he became so mad. He threw his 5-year-old son on the ground and said, you rascal, how did you say that there is somebody else who is greater than I? I am the greatest of all. Now, isn't that ironical? He, when talking to his own mother after the departure of his brother Hiranyaksha and to his Babi and the relatives, is talking about, there is a Supreme Lord, there is law of karma, I'm not the body but a spirit soul. So that's how it happens. Similarly, if you see, Ravana was also a son of a great Brahmana. So they were highly learned with the scriptures, yet their conclusions were highly atheistic. The conclusions were, I am the Supreme God. And that is what it means. Those who are of demonic nature, they just become more and more atheistic. They become convinced of their atheistic conclusion. In other words, they become more and more deluded. That's how Lord Shri Krishna explains here. So then Arjuna pondered and he thought, my dear Lord, what are those who do respect you as Krishna, as a Supreme Personality Godhead? Krishna said they are called as Mahatmas. Mahatmanastu mam partha daivam prakritamashritah bhajanti ananaya manaso jnanatva bhutadim apyayam. Please read out the translation, 9th chapter, verse number 13. Yes, please.
O son of Partha, those who are not diseased, the great souls, are under the protection of the divine nature. They are fully engrossed in devotional service because they know me as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, original and inexhaustible. Hare Krishna.
So Krishna said, Daivam Prakritim Ashrita. They are always under the protection of my internal energy. Krishna has three energies. His energies can be at a high level, can be divided into three: internal, marginal, and external energy. Marginal energy are represented by us, Jiva Tattva, who are always a shelter seeker. So we can either take shelter of the external energy or the internal energy. External energy is represented by the jailkeeper of this material world, that is Durga Devi. We discussed about her yesterday. And the internal energy is represented by Srimati Radharani. So Krishna said, all the Mahatmas are under the protection of my internal energy, means they are under the protection of Srimati Radharani. Why? Bhajantya ananayo manaso gyata bhutadim avyam. They are always engaged in my devotional service, and nothing can distract or divert their attention from rendering devotional service unto me. Can all of you think of any examples from the history where Mahatma had to live with the demoniac people, and yet, despite being under the association of demonic people all their life, never ever they stopped their devotional practice. Never ever they got distracted by the temptations and allurements that they had to witness in the association of demonic people. Any such Mahatmas comes to your mind? Jesus Christ. Okay, Swati ji.
Prahlad Maharaj.
Yes, correct. Shri Krishna Chandri and Smita ji. Prahlad Maharaj. Who else?
Mandodari, wife of Ravana.
Mandodari.
Dhruva Maharaj.
Dhruva. Who was the bad association with Dhruva?
Vibhishan.
Mother Sunidhi.
No.
His stepmother.
Suruchi.
Stepmother.
Suruchi was not atheist, or Suruchi was not a demon like Ravana and Hiranyakashipu. She was just a too attached wife. She was too attached to her self-interest. So that's not necessarily in this context. So classic examples are Vibhishan. Classic example is Vidura. He was always under the association of...
Hiranyakashipu's wife also, Guruji.
Huh?
Hiranyakashipu's wife
Yeah,
also was.
Hiranyakashipu's wife, Kayadu. There is not much is mentioned. There's not much is mentioned about Kayadu. Kayadu is being mentioned anywhere as a devotee. But not also that she was a atheistic. Not like that. So what we are speaking about Mahatma. Mahatma refers to who is known as a devotee of the Lord. Kayadu was a good lady. Mandodari is known as to be one of the chaste ladies, wife of Ravana. But again, they're not being recognized as the devotees of the Lord. So when Hanumanji had gone to Lanka, there was only one house from which he could hear the constant chanting of Lord Ram's name. And whose house was it? That was Vibhishan's. So Vibhishan was surrounded by demons. So Vidura was surrounded by demons or demonic mentalities, but they could never ever get distracted in Devi. That's an example. Why? Devim Prakriti Ashrataha, as this verse says. They were under the protection of the internal energy of the Lord. Making sense? That's the point here with this. Okay, let's move forward with this discussion. So Arjuna thought, my dear Lord.
Point,
Yes, go ahead.
Initial days of Srila Prabhupada, he was also surrounded by, not demonic, but
Atheistic class.
District class. You know?
Yeah, totally hedonistic society that point of time. Correct. Prabhupada is a modern day Hanuman. Like Hanumanji flew to Lanka. Lanka was a hedonistic society, so filled with sense gratification. So America was. Hanumanji flew, Srila Prabhupada cruised across the ocean, isn't it? So yes, correct. Thank you. Let's move forward. So Arjuna thought, my dear Lord, how do I recognize such personalities? Then Krishna says, the 14th verse, what are the nature of the Mahatmas? Satatam kitayantu mam yatantascha dhradvrataha namasyantascha mam bhaktya nitya yukta upasate. Kirtanya, they are always chanting. Dhradvrataha, with a fixed determination. Namasyanti, offering respects to me. Nitya yukta, they're always engaged in my devotional service. Always. They're always absorbed in my devotional service. I'd like to give you one small example of a very, very great king from South India by the name of King Kulashekar. This King Kulashekar, I believe he was a king somewhere of the Karnataka and then down south, everywhere. Every morning, he would have the Brahmanas recite Ramayana. So at one point in time, the reading of Ramayana came to the point where Supraka attacked Mother Sita, and in retaliation, Lord Lakshman chopped off the nose of Supraka. As you know, the story unfolds. Supraka went to Ravana, Ravana went to Maricha, Maricha became a golden deer, and finally Ravana kidnapped Mother Sita. So when this narration was done to King Kulashekar, he was not hearing, he was witnessing the whole pastime. It is described by the historians. King Kulashekar became so angry, he rose from his seat, throne, and he thundered. And he said to his ministers, prepare my army. Today itself will march to Lanka and destroy Ravana and rescue Mother Sita. And ministers were wondering, what's going on, my dear Lord? This is almost 12 lakh years ago this pastime happened. And as a minister, you cannot speak to the king. So they had to oblige. And the king, Kulashekar, along with whole entourage and the army, actually walked up to Rameshwaram. And now the king Kulashekar told his ministers, so build the bridge. And the ministers were really confused and thinking, this old man has got crazy. We will drown and he will also drown. We all will die. We have to do something. So one of the ministers was an intelligent man. So he asked for the Brahmanas and he said, you brought us to this situation. You have to solve it. Please fast forward your reading and come to the point of the reading where Hanumanji is bringing Mother Sita out of the Lanka to Lord Ram when Lord Ram had killed Ravana. And the Brahmanas began to recite that portion of Ramayana to Kulashekar. And as soon as the king Kulashekar heard that Mother Sita had come back, so he became very joyful and he declared, all right, so our army had been victorious, Mother Sita had been rescued, let's go back to our kingdom. Now, he was not a crazy man. It was his absorption to that degree. So absorbed was he. And King Kulashekar have written many, many wonderful poems in glorification of the Lord, which are sung even today and are very famous among the devotee community. So this is what absorption, as Krishna is mentioning here, kirtaniya, dhradvrataha, namasyantya, nitya yukta, like that. And now Krishna explains about three kinds of worshippers who worship the Lord but indirectly. Ekatvena, pratatvena, bahuda, vishvatomukam. What it means? These are three kinds of indirect worshippers. Ekatvena, they worship himself as one with the Supreme Lord. They're called as Mayavadis in other words. But at least they have the sense that they're not the body but spiritual, so they are acknowledged for that. Pratatvena bahuda, paganism, as we call in English, worshipping the different objects of the nature or worshipping the nature. It includes the worshippers of Devatas. And then Vishvatomukam. Vishvatomukam means the worshipping of the universal form of the Lord. Among all three, Vishvatomukam worshippers are said to be the highest, best of all. Among these three, at least, they are not worshipping themselves as the Lord. They are not worshipping anything else as the Lord. They're worshipping the Virat Roop, the form of the Lord, as the supreme object of worship. Like this, there are three categories of worshippers who indirectly try to approach the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So, after this, from verse number 20 to 25, Lord Shri Krishna speaks about demigod worshippers, where Lord Shri Krishna will describe how the demigod worshippers, they are less intelligent, they don't know who is the source of the energy or the source of the powers of their own devatas. The benedictions of devatas are perishable, like that Lord Shri Krishna will speak. So this discussion will take at length. We'll discuss in length about the four eternal truths: Vishnu Tattva, Shiva Tattva, Shakti Tattva, and Jiva Tattva. So we'll explain about what are these four eternal truths, what are the characteristics of it, the difference between Vishnu and Lord Shiva, the difference between and the relationship between Lord Vishnu and Devatas. Will be a discussion in itself. And after this, we'll come to the concluding part of this chapter, the most important part, the most confidential knowledge, which is the relationship between the pure devotees of the Lord and Lord Shri Krishna. However, we'll continue this discussion tomorrow because our time is up for today. I would like to, speak on the subject matter, not hurry. Anyways, you're not studying Bhagavad Gita because after 2 weeks, Government of India have organized an exam for you. So there's no exam or anything that you have to appear for which you have to finish the syllabus. So I went through in hurry from most of the chapters, but 9th chapter I wanted, because the most important chapter of Bhagavad Gita, to at least bring out some of the principles loud and clear. So that these two parts we'll discuss tomorrow. To conclude for today we saw about the knowledge which Krishna is about to give, the qualities of that knowledge. Rajavidya, Pavitram, Vidamuttamam, Guhyamam, like that, Dharmayam, Lord Shri Krishna describes. And then Lord Shri Krishna spoke about his inconceivable nature, how he is within everything and yet without of everything. And then we saw discuss about the Mudas, the foolish men who just can never understand the Lord. Gave example of Duryodhana, Shishupal. They concoct their own understanding about the Supreme Lord. Then we also spoke about those who accept Krishna. Krishna calls them as Mahatmas. We also discussed about their qualities. So how do we understand who is a Mahatma? And then we saw three indirect worshippers: Ekatvena, Pratatvena, Vishwato Mukham. Ekatvena, they worship the ancestors to be Lord. Pratatvena, they worship the different elements of nature as God. And Vishwato Mukham, they worship the Virat Roop, the universal form of the Lord, as the representative of the Lord. And tomorrow we'll continue our discussion on the 20th verse of 9th chapter up to the 34th verse, which is the last verse of 9th chapter. And two main themes, Devatas versus Vishnu, also discussion on Shiva Tattva. And second thing, the Guhyatamam Jnana, the relationship between Krishna and his devotees and the nature of it. With that, we pause here for today. Thank you all for your kind attention, joining us despite being a working day. So sincerely grateful to all of you for taking out your time. It's not easy in today's time to sit through every evening. Maybe 6 months ago or 1 year ago, it was okay when there was actually a lockdown. Now the world has opened. Maybe people are traveling to office and whatnot. Yet some of you are coming up. Thank you so much. So I'll pause here in case if anyone has anything to clarify. They can go ahead and unmute themselves and speak up. Yes, you can unmute yourself.
Guruji,
Okay, who is speaking?
Hare Krishna Prabhuji.
Yes,
Myself Kalyan.
boliye, mother.
Prabhuji, a few minutes before you explain, Prabhuji, directly or indirectly we can means chanting the Lord Krishna holy name. But demons also indirectly comes in that process comes also indirectly chanting the Lord Krishna holy name. So, but But when that time Lord Krishna given the moksha to Kamsa, Prabhuji. So how can we understanding devotees means some difference, na Prabhuji. So how can we understanding what type of Krishna given the guidance to devotees to everyone? Can you please explain to me?
I'll paraphrase your question. Correct me if I understand you correctly. Demons like Kamsa were envious of the Lord, yet Krishna gave them liberation. Putana, Shishupal, all got liberation. So how did they got it? And how did Lord Shri Krishna deals differently with devotees? Is that correct?
Yes, Prabhuji.
It's a question which is asked by Yudhishthira Maharaj Narad Muni in the 7th chapter himself. Is Lord partial or impartial? Does he show favor to his devotees, or is he against the non-devotees? We'll see this question more in length tomorrow, but I'll just give you 1 or 2 lines on this. First of all, the like Shishupal, Putana, Kamsa, etc., they were absorbed in remembering Krishna. Unfortunately, they were not absorbed in thinking about Krishna favorably, unfavorably. Secondly, they were killed by Krishna. So, if any living entity or demon is killed by Vishnu directly, they get moksha. That is the reason why Kamsa, Shishupal, Putana all got moksha. That's the background of it. All right? And is Krishna partial, impartial, and how does he favor his devotee? That's anyways the discussion for tomorrow, which we'll take tomorrow. Hare Krishna. Anything
Okay,
else?
Prabhuji, thank you so much. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Anything else?
Prabhuji, this acronym G stands for, are we taking up tomorrow?
Yes. We just discussed the KIN.
Okay.
Knowledge, improper worship, inconceivable potencies, and N for non-worship. G we'll discuss tomorrow. Okay?
And Prabhuji, this question what you had put in WhatsApp, the first question, does Lord have form or is he formless? Krishna was actually, Krishna was a human being and he was killed by a hunter. So how, any justification on that we are worshipping him as a form or a formless, does that thing holds good here or how?
Okay, so I don't know exactly what your question is, but if your question is centered around how do we understand Lord Shri Krishna's disappearance through the shooting of an arrow by a hunter, is that what you're trying to understand? And mixing it up with the form and formless? Let's separate the two concepts separately. Let's focus on Krishna's disappearance. Krishna's appearance was also not something very special. Krishna appeared in a prison house, isn't it? The Supreme Personality of God. Where did he appear? He appeared not in the chambers of a queen. He appeared in the prison house. So what kind of a God Krishna is, where his parents have been imprisoned, and that too after appearing, he ran away from the prison house, isn't it? He is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He should have set his parents free. So Krishna is a personality which creates the maximum doubts and contradictions. His appearance is controversial. His leelas are controversial. He would dance with the wives of other gopas. He would steal butter from the homes of other gopis. He would get angry and break their butter pot. Whereas he was the king of the Vrindavan. His father was a king, had 9 lakh cows. There is no logic which justifies the need for Krishna to steal. Mother Yashoda had 9 special cows who were fed the best of the milk of all other lakhs of cows, and they were also fed Padma Gandha grass, which ultimately made the milk of these 9 cows the most delicious. And of that, Mother Yashoda would personally hand churn the butter, makhan, for Krishna. Why would Krishna have to go and steal outside somewhere? And that same Krishna on the battlefield broke his vow multiple times. He protected Arjuna several times. And the same Krishna then again disappeared in the most controversial way. getting shot by a hunter's arrow. Not only that, Krishna's whole Yaduvamsha also disappeared in a most controversial way, where the whole Yaduvamshas fought with each other and bet each other to death. Hare Krishna. So, welcome to Krishna's life, the most controversial personality of Godhead. Lord Ram instead is very simple. Maryada Purushottam.
But that's what Mayavadis versus Bhaktas will be, illusion versus the devotees.
Yes.
Is it
So
like
now,
that
if it,
illusory that we are seeing Krishna as an illusion here?
no,
versus
what it means, if you remember the graph, when I had shown you when I had taken on the tour of the spiritual world, I had shown you Brahman on the map. And then I had said, you see the effulgence, the rays. Brahman is called as Brahma Jyoti. It's a light. So then I said, who is the source of that light? That was Krishna's body. From Krishna's form emanates a ray, which is called as Brahma Jyoti. And therefore, Krishna would say in the 15th chapter, Na tad bhasyate suryo na shashankana pavaka yad gatva na nivartante tathama paramamama. In that spiritual word, Arjuna, you don't need the sunlight or the moonlight. It's self-effulgent. Or what self-effulgent? Brahma Jyoti, which is emanating from the body of the Lord. Therefore, the Vedic scripture says, I made this point in the very first session of Bhagavad Gita. The Bhagavad Gita redefines your destination. At that point of time, I had said, Asatoma Satgamaya Tamsoma Jyotirgamaya. Tamaso, the place of darkness, to the place of light. Why the material world is called as place of darkness? Because it depends on the sunlight and the moonlight. It's not self-effulgent. Tamasoma to Jyotirgamaya. Spiritual world is said to be place of light. There is no need of any artificial or any additional source of light, because there is a Brahma Jyoti coming from the body of Krishna. So that is Brahman, the sunshine. Just like sun and sunshine. Sunshine is effulgence, rays of the sun planet. That is called as Brahman. So these Mayavadis, their eyes get so glittered, brightened up by the sunshine, that they cannot actually see the form of the Lord. Only a devotee can see beyond the sunshine. There is a sun planet. And on the sun planet, there is a sun god Vivaswan. That's only devotees understands. So this is the analogy that I had made. Sunshine is equivalent to Brahma Jyoti, and Vivaswan is equivalent to Lord Shri Krishna, who is the source of that Jyoti. All right, Mother?
Okay, Prabhuji. Yeah.
All right. Thank you everyone for joining in. See you tomorrow. Continue with our 9th chapter. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.